welcome to the latest episode of the Lisa Pezik Show. Even though the podcast is named after me, you are going to hear that it actually has nothing to do with me. It's about the amazing guests that I bring on. It's about strategies and systems to move your business and your life ahead, to have those aha moments and then go and do something with it. So today, I am so excited to have a newfound friend and author and Funk Quest competitor. We'll tell you what that's all about in a moment. My friend Barb Braendlein. Did I murder that? Did I say it right?
It was perfect. I'm so impressed. And that only took, like 18 tries before we got here? That's amazing.
So Barb is here. Barb, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. I'm really excited for this.
Oh my gosh. So let me tell you about Barb. Barb is an author, an urban farm wife, and a homeschooling mom of her 4 special needs kids. Her writing seeks to shine light on the deep joys that are found in seemingly ordinary lives, the extraordinary that lurks in every corner of the mundane. Her new book, I'm so excited to talk about this with you, Barb. Her new book, Olive, recently released by Atmosphere Press, tells the story of the world through the eyes of a nonverbal, medically fragile 5-year-old girl, and is fiction drawn from her very real life adventures raising kids with mitochondrial disease. Okay, sister, let me tell you. So, and listeners, I binged this book yesterday because I wanted to know all about Olive and I wanted to know, Barb, about your writing. And did I go through a journey in that book?
I'm very glad.
I went through a journey of emotions, and it was written in such a beautiful way that I think it was things that even I took for granted, maybe as a mom, that are exactly like you said, those kind of insignificant little things that you see it through the eyes of a child. Mm-hmm. And it was beautiful. And one of them for me was when you were talking about how Olive was always wrapped close to you. And like your heartbeat and that feeling being so like calming. Because I think about my own son and how much he loves to just like snuggle in. And, you know, he's 7, but he still loves to cuddle and snuggle, which I love. And just like how comforting and safe that is for them, especially as we're, filming this in this wild time, in 2021 that we are, where the world is not safe in some places and there is craziness going on. So, I want to dive into the book and what made you decide to write the book?
So people have been telling me for years, like probably since I was a teenager, like you ought to write a book. And I used to think that it meant that they saw some writing potential in me. Like there's, you've got a future, kid. It took me a long time to figure out that it's code. It's code for like, I find your life a little bit overwhelming right now, and I'd like to exit this conversation. Like, you should write a book, right? And so every time that I have sat down in the last 10 years or so to try and write this out, because I've had an interesting journey. Like I do have 4 kids with mitochondrial disease. We have moved 15 times in the last 17 years, something like that. Things have happened. But when I would try and write it down as nonfiction, when I try and write it biographically, I'd get to the end and think, not even I believe this. This just doesn't even seem plausible to me. Like, so the idea for writing it as fiction actually came from that desire, twofold desire. One, to simplify what I think is actually kind of a complicated story. I didn't want to write a book about mitochondrial disease. Yeah. I didn't want to write a book about the specifics of my health or my husband's, or I wanted it to be something that people could pick up and understand something new about humanity, something that they would relate to, right? And I found that fiction it's like handing a camera to a toddler. Like you'll get all these great shots of doorknobs and carpet fibers and things that you weren't looking for. And it takes away all of the big stuff we look for. It's no longer a picture of Mount Rainier. It's a picture of a thumb, right? And that's sort of how I viewed this story was I don't, it is written from the perspective of a 5-year-old girl who cannot speak, cannot walk. She's very dependent on her family for everything. But it means, where she is developmentally and where she is in her life, we don't know her parents' names because she doesn't know. She doesn't know what her dad does for a living. And so it's not in the book. We don't know names of doctors and we don't know names of medical conditions because as far as she's concerned, she doesn't have one. This is just life. So fiction was freeing.
Yeah. And I love that so much. And the book really hits on like what actually matters about everything. Like I remember even being a nurse. Like I was a nurse before I was an entrepreneur, and I can remember like it would always irk me when they would say, "Yeah, number 47, patient in room 47 needs blah 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 blah," and I'm like, that person has a name, that person has a family, that person has a story. They're not, number 47. They are a human being, and I love how in the book you don't tell us how to feel. You paint it through the eyes of Olive. Like, I know the look on, like, even where it would say, like, I know the look on mommy's face when mommy doesn't like that person or mommy's upset with that person because I can tell by the way her eyes look, or I can tell by the way she's, looking at that person, or by the way mom smells, or the look on dad's face, or that's through the eyes of what kids see and what they take in. I mean, whether they are, whether they have a mitochondrial disease or they're nonverbal or they're fully functioning.
Yeah.
Kids pick up on those kinds of things.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I love the way that you talked about things in that book that even hit home for me. I was so mad at those kids that threw the bullying incident of the kids at the park that threw the bark on Olive. I was mad when I read that. I was mad. And was that a true scenario that happened to?
That was, yeah. So a lot of this, the story is fiction. But I definitely drew from actual experiences. And that was one that had happened. She was younger than 5 actually when it happened, but not able to walk, not able to, and I just, that was the first and last time that we ever did a play group. I was so upset. I just couldn't. And I think looking back, so now she's over a decade past that now. And I look back and I think, what it was realizing that none of these other mothers had to pay attention the way that I did. Like it gave us, it wasn't only that they were hurting my kid and that if I went back to playgroup, I probably would have ended up in jail. There was that. But it was the realization that like, we are living a completely different world than like, I just could not relate to young moms maybe I still don't. I don't know. There were just things that I thought, how are you not seeing what your little tyrant is doing to my kid? But I think at that time, her health was so unstable that I had to be watching in a way that I don't think you maybe have to if you're, I don't know.
Yeah. But you were in that you were kind of in that constant protector mode and that constant, like, you had to be the eyes, like Mama Bear, like, or Mama Wolf. Like you had to be the eyes and the ears, always, looking at the scenario and the surrounding. Yeah. But I think you bring up a good point that sometimes there's conversations that I think parents need to have with kids and they don't. Like about, kids that look different or kids that sound different, kids that speak different, kids that have different color of their skin, kids that aren't looking, talking, sounding, functioning like them. Yeah. And how do we include them? How do we ask questions instead of assuming and making fun? And Oliver has a friend in his karate class that has some kind of psychomotor, like she's a lot slower, she moves slower, and she's really uncoordinated. And, like Oliver's like, why does she do that? And I was like, why don't you ask her, bud? I was like, ask her, like, talk to her about it, have a conversation, right? Instead of like, instead of thinking or instead of saying or assuming, I'm like, ask her how she feels, ask her why that's hard for her, what goes on in her brain or what she's thinking, or I'm like, open up the conversation, buddy. Right. And
it's huge. And kids kids have this capacity to be totally accepting of whatever you tell them. Yeah. My oldest two each have feeding tubes. They're both tube fed. Yeah. And there have been multiple times when they're willing to do a feeding, for playing at someone's house where kids are, where we as adults, we kind of do the whole like avert the eyes. We're going to pretend like this isn't happening. But I'm like, there's syringes and tubes. Yep. Like you can't pretend this isn't happening. Kids will come up and be like, can I do it? Can I push the syringe? And my girls are great with it. They're like, yes, let me teach you exactly how to do it and what it feels like. And then it ceases to be a difference between them. That is the, I am so struck watching them that there is power in being willing to assume that somebody else has thoughts too, right? That they have an experience. And I think sometimes, especially in cases where there's either nonverbal or just not able, whatever the thing that is hindering, not able to communicate what they're thinking, it's so easy for us to assume that they aren't thinking and feeling what we do.
Yeah.
That's something I wanted to break through in writing Olive, is I wanted people to be able to see that this child that didn't speak for a long time, and she continued to have, still has difficulty with speech to this day. It doesn't mean that less is going on. It doesn't mean that it's not worth taking the extra time to listen to it, to find out what she's thinking. So I enjoyed writing it from that perspective, so that we could see that something else is going on here.
Yeah. Or that they don't understand. That's always the misconception that, I can remember even again back to nursing where, where I would have people that, would have trouble speaking or would have trouble, talking. And I would be like shouting at them and they would be like, and then they would write and they'd be like, I'm not hard of hearing. Like, right. Sort of a young nurse. Like, I'm like, I don't know why I assume because you can't speak, you can't hear. Like, I don't know why I'm shouting at you. Like,
but it's human nature. Like,
you different things, right? And it's like, unless, you are willing to learn and you're willing to open up a conversation and you're right. Kids don't know bias. They don't know that they're weird or different unless someone tells them they're weird or different, or unless, I remember even when Oliver was coloring the tan crayon, he would like, I need the skin color crayon. And I'm like, ooh, buddy. I'm like, we gotta have a talk about that, right? And I'm like, there's all different color, skin type. Anyway, so we have like big conversation about it. And now he knows, like he'll catch himself. He'll be like, I need the tan colored, or I need the brown colored. Like he gets it now. Yeah. Because we had a conversation about it. But not saying good, bad, right, wrong, but so many parents, they don't want to have they don't know how to have a conversation. Right. They don't want to have a conversation, or they have their own biases. Like, why is that kid with my kid? And like just weird stuff. I agree with you. I stayed away from mommy groups because there was a lot of, if you don't breastfeed or if you do breastfeed, cloth diaper, there's a lot of opinions and judgments.
Yeah, there's something about the whole young mom season of life. And I don't know if it's more hormones or just that we really need to feel like we know what we're doing, because it all feels like we don't know what we're doing. I have been so struck in raising these kids, but also in, with the book and just interacting with other people, how much I do this, how much I am the one that I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to say something that makes me look stupid. In the end, if I look back at it honestly, my attention is entirely on me. Like, how comfortable am I asking you what's going on, how you're doing? And I think that there's something to be learned there from kids in their bluntness. Here we're trying so hard to make sure that we don't hurt feelings, but they, I think, are able to sometimes make connections that I don't as an adult, just at their willingness to learn about another person. I find that uncomfortable, I guess, to see in myself that that it's so easy for me to do the same thing and assume that I don't understand it. I'm not.
Yeah, they're so in tune. Like, that's what that book really helped me see, is they pick up on every sound, every expression, every nonverbal. It's like interesting because Olive is nonverbal, but it's like they pick up then on all those nonverbal feelings and like things that are happening in their world. Kids are so receptive and they're so smart. Yeah. And that was what I got out of that book. I'm like, man, Olive is smart. She is receptive. She is there, even though she is frustrated that her legs can't move a certain way, or she can't speak the words that she wants to speak. And I think just it really helped me see I don't know if tenderness, innocence, maybe the innocence of children that we forget about. Because even when you were writing about when you were pregnant with the second, And I was like, oh, in my brain, I'm like, is Olive going to like this? Is she not going to like this? Is she going to be jealous that, maybe mom and dad aren't going to be there for her 100% of the time? And Olive thought it was the best thing in the world that she had a sister.
Yeah. And doesn't really pay attention through most of the pregnancy. She knows that there's a thing going on, but it's not something she's giving a lot of attention to. It's not real yet until baby's there, right?
Yeah.
I enjoyed writing her as a character, even though, in part because I got to live with the real thing, right? But the thing that I was so struck with in watching my own kids, and that I hope got conveyed in the book, is that she did not ever view herself as sick. She didn't view, I think sometimes we get attached to this idea of normal. Like, this is what my life is supposed to look like. This is where I thought I would be right now. I mean, shoot, we're all coming off of 2020. I think plenty of us thought that there were things that were going to happen that didn't expect to be where we are. My kids did not realize that they had a genetic condition until maybe a year ago. And we're going on 10 years of feeding tubes. This is just normal. This is what our life is like. And it's not, so they eat differently than other people. So we sleep differently than maybe. It's not, I feel like there's something there that has probably been the biggest takeaway as a special needs parent is, your life does not have to be normal to be good. I think that we can have this tendency to spend so much time, so much time doing the support group thing, doing the, how do I cope with what I'm being given, instead of saying, this is what I have, and I'm going to like what I have. I like my life. And I think that if we can get away from the picture in our heads of what it's supposed to be, then we can start looking at what it actually is and seeing, look at the world through Olive's eyes, because there's still beautiful colors everywhere and there's still light. And she's not walking, but she's getting where she wants to go. She's experiencing the world. I wonder how much as adults too, we miss out on the world around us just because we're so busy looking at what it's not.
Oh, that is such a good point. I love that you said your life doesn't have to be normal to be good. Yeah. That is so, so, so true. And that was one of the biggest things, like just reading that book. It just really put it in perspective about what matters in life and what you make of things. You always have that choice, like you said, to say, oh, I don't have this, or I'm missing out on this, or this is my situation, or this is what I do have. This is the beauty of what you do have. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love that so much.
We definitely had to hit some points in the early years of having kids with special needs. We battled through, we made a lot of mistakes. We just made a lot of mistakes. But I remember holidays in particular. I have this picture of what we do at holidays, right? Like you get together with all the family, but at the time, my kids got sick so easily. And if they got sick, we were talking hospitals. We were talking weeks of recovery. When we were finally able to detach a little bit from the picture of what we thought was normal, and we had more isolated holidays, but we have more traditions than anyone that I know, because it's important, because we were able to finally look and say, okay, this is what we can do. This is what we do have. And if I can get away from the picture in my head of what I think it's supposed to be, I can love what I do have. And that became the theme of our life. There is something worth celebrating every single day. And that I can honestly say that, I took a lot of grief in the early years. It's a grieving process to see the picture of what you thought your life was going to be, to see it just implode. And that's what a diagnosis like this, I mean, plenty of people have their own thing where it's like, well, that just went away. Okay. The thing that I thought was going to be my life is not anymore. When the grief passed, I think it's amazing to be able to look up and see that we have a life that we love. It's not just that we found ways to cope. It's that these things that made it so hard at the beginning are the very things that have made them great, that has made our family life, our work, the choices we've made have been so different than if they had not had these medical conditions. So I lost my own self on a tangent. Anyway, normal's overrated.
No, not at all. That's why you heard me like not saying a damn word, because that's powerful. Everything you just said is so powerful. Oh, and I like that you addressed that the grief is there.
Oh yeah.
Because I think that's BS to just like always be happy and always be this poster child of I got all my stuff together and I am the perfect mom and look at me doing all these things right and I'm so inclusive and loving. And, you know, I'm sure there were lots of days where it was like a puddle of tears on the ground.
Oh yeah. I spent years where I think people probably couldn't. I think I drove people away, honestly, for at least 2 years. My kids were not expected to live longer than maybe a year. And my way of responding, I could not handle people coming and saying all the right things to me.
Yeah.
I remember being in the emergency room and having to check in and having some very well-intentioned registration person say, well, how does she word it? You know that these babies must have just looked down from heaven and chosen you. Like, what special parents? And I just remember thinking, like, you do realize that isn't good news. Like, that they looked down and saw me and said, wow, that person needs work. We should definitely give her 4 of these medical conditions. Like, that makes sense. But people say things like this. And I think that maybe had I been in less grief, I would have been more able to take the good and leave the bad. And as it was, I just felt like, oh my goodness, done talking to people. Like, people are discouraging to me. And so I look back, I messed up relationships from those years that I'm still trying to fix because grief is a real thing. And I think that grief was essential. I think that if we hadn't gone ahead and admitted that, even if it's, my kids lived, it's not grief like that. They're still alive. But I think anytime that we have that loss of what we thought our life was going to be, anytime that we have that major shift where you got to adjust, you're on to a new adventure, even if it's one you're excited about, I think that there is an element of grief that's worth acknowledging. Mm-hmm. There's some mourning to be done, even if what you're moving on towards is better. Yeah. Maybe you liked what you had.
Yeah. And it's okay. When I hear people say things like that, like, oh, God chose you, or what a blessing in your life, or even when people die, they say, oh, well, now they're back with God. You know, their purpose on this life has been fulfilled. And everyone just wants to make it okay.
Yeah. But it hurts.
Yeah. And there's times when it's not okay. And it's okay to not feel okay.
Yeah. I think that that was something that I had to come to over the course of years, was that grief was necessary. And, we had, when we first got diagnosed, and it was at my oldest was 9 months old, and we had just found out we were pregnant with the Winnie character, okay, who in real life is Holly. The grief was enormous. Okay. We were sent home from the hospital again with this child that she'd become infant-like overnight. She couldn't hold her head up. She couldn't move her arms on her own. It was, and she didn't sleep. She was unable to fall asleep. Okay. So we were having to sedate her at night. It was a difficult time. I had, back in those days, I did a lot of jazz piano, and I played in a band with a guy that was, at that point, he was in his 60s, and he came by the house and told me a story that I just remember thinking, this is horrifying. Why would you tell me this now? He was telling about these friends of his that they had lost a child, and they ended up divorced because they each thought that the other one was not grieving as much as they were, right? Because they grieved so differently. I look back and I think, this man did me the greatest kindness probably out of anybody at that time in my life, because he pointed out to me that we grieve differently within a marriage as people and friendships. We are not going to grieve the same. There's not a lot of rules about how we grieve. My husband needed people. I did not. But I think had we not gotten that, nudge into our thinking, he could have looked at me and said, wow, she is just cut off. She's not dealing with things. I could have looked at him and thought, why aren't you more upset? How can you handle people coming in and saying all the wrong things to you? By allowing each other to grieve, and by giving space, by giving space for that person that you love to grieve, what it ended up doing was we grew stronger through our marriage in those years. We grew to see, to pay attention in different ways. It's not just that there's going to be grief, but it's going to look totally different.
Yeah.
He might need to go garden when I think that you ought to be sitting and crying, right? He might need to go garden because that's how he's surviving the grief. And that was, I owe that man probably a fruit basket or something, but yeah,
fruit basket. Oh man, that's so true. And I never thought about it that way with grief. Two people could be experiencing the same thing, but completely experiencing it differently.
Yes. And how much that can hurt us, when we don't see, grief can be very lonely. Even if it's a grief, I always feel a little bit funny putting it this way, because like I said, my kids are still alive. It almost feels like I'm not justified to have grieved for that long. But life was turned upside down, and I went the next decade or so without ever sleeping. There were things that got harder. But what it did relationally for us, to have to learn to pay attention. I'm so glad someone pointed it out to me, because I think that is something that causes a lot of strain in marriages with special needs kids, maybe in marriages in general, that we don't see that, because they're parenting differently, because they're processing differently, because their response on the outside is different. We think that somehow it's not as deep, that they don't care as much, that they don't feel as much love, like fill in the blank of what our mind jumps to. But we recognize our own emotions, and I don't think we're great at recognizing other people's. So,
now, did your husband read the book? That might be a silly question, but did he read it?
Portions of it, yes. Honestly, it was a hard read for my husband.
Yeah, like I was gonna say, did he go back and say like, oh, that didn't happen that way, or I didn't want to relive that? Like, what was his experience with the book?
It was, so I think by now he read it slowly over time and kind of read as I was writing it. But we were at an interesting point in our lives when I was writing it. And so there was, there were things that we remember differently, for sure. The biggest thing, he got to the end, he's like, wow, I look pretty good in that book. And which is true. He does. And that's who he was. I think somebody told me later in a review that it seemed like I, unnecessarily propped up the dad. I'm like, nope, that's really what he was like. That's how he got through those years. But he definitely, it was an emotional read for him, because even though it is fiction, so there are things that I changed about it. There's enough that's real to our life that it was hard to write. I think it was hard for him to read. Took us back to some pretty tough times.
I think there's just so much power in writing. Even if you don't ever plan to publish it, if you don't ever plan to let anyone read it, there's something so healing and powerful about putting words on paper that means something to you.
Oh, totally. And just the act of naming something. I mean, do you find that like in dealing with, one of my daughters deals with OCD, and there is something about naming what the anxiety is, like naming what the compulsion is. It shines light on it. Nothing is as scary when we've shined light on it. And I feel like writing is basically just like giant light bulbs. It's the opportunity to put the experience on paper. Like, you have a name now. You are not the thing that haunts me at night. You have a name, and I've put you where you belong. You're in a story now. You're part of a bigger story.
Yeah. My husband and I had that with our little guy. Our little guy has separation anxiety. He spends 24/7 with us. And whenever he can't be with us, it's tears and fear and worry. And, for the longest time, it was just like, he just loves mom, and he just loves dad. And people are like, again, saying really well-intentioned, or people saying, well, you need to, cut it off and be tough with him and give him tough love. And everybody wants to jump in and find a solution. Yeah. Right. And I'm like, no, he has separation anxiety. Like, we need to call it what it is. Yeah. We need to get help. on how to navigate this. He is loving life right now because there is no separation with 2020, and he is with us 24/7. But it was like, I think my husband was so afraid to have a quote unquote label or it was, to make it something. But unless you make it something and call it what it is, you can't. It's always like that elephant in the room, or it's always that thing that plagues you. It's always that uncomfortable thing that you don't know that you have shame around. Or again, like I was like, honey, he has separation anxiety. It doesn't mean we're bad parents. It doesn't mean we failed him. It doesn't mean, like when you can open the discussion and talk about it, it becomes less shameful or scary or overwhelming. And I think
that's definitely true.
Carry shame. I would imagine around, same thing with kids with special needs. And did I do something wrong, or should I have done this?
Yeah.
Or all of that.
And there's a lot of pressure that happens in the best intentioned ways.
Yeah.
Right. And I think on parents in general, just a lot of, this is what good parenting looks like. This is what we definitely experienced that with, the early years of being told that they needed to be in a public school system, right? Like there's services there that they need to be at. And we've homeschooled from the get-go, in part because of medical needs, and in part because I saw like, there's no way, sorry, I live in a city, there's sirens. There's no way that that there's the best of teachers is not going to be able to figure out what I can one-on-one with my own kid, right?
Yeah.
She's got 25 people in the room. Like that's impossible. But there's so much pressure. And then you start to see, suppose your kid struggles with something. Suppose there's anxiety. Does it mean that you screwed it all up? Does it mean that you should have listened to all the voices that said to do it? You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of built-in pressure. And I think you're right that shame gets lumped into that. Naming it at least gives us a start. It's a launching pad. So.
Yes. Now tell me about homeschooling these kiddos, because this is like a hot topic of, people are questioning with this landscape that we're in. I think there's a lot of biases about homeschooling as well.
Oh, totally. The whole why do they pull their socks up to their knees and they can't talk to people?
Kids are weird. They're not sociable. They don't know how to get along with other kids. They're going to be so far behind, which is all BS, which none of that. Again, someone's pre-imposed fears that have now become Facebook truth or whatever it is, right? It's like, if it was on Facebook, it was the real deal, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, they told me all about who won the election and all about everything. Yeah. So the thing is, most stereotypes come from something, right? Like we knew homeschoolers 20 years ago that were absolutely like that. The thing that I wish that I'd understood going into it for myself and that maybe would help your listeners now because I'm not going to lie, remote learning looks like the hardest thing I've ever seen. That is not homeschooling. Y'all, that is not homeschooling. Homeschooling is way easier than that. But I think because you get to find what works for your family. I think sometimes we get boxed into this idea of schooling. Okay, so schooling to us means that we're going to spend 8 hours a day in a classroom and that there ought to be a break at a certain time. And so when we think homeschooling, we think, well, that must mean 8 hours at the kitchen table and they never see friends and they don't play sports and they're weird, right?
Yep.
I'm sure people can do it that way. That's totally fine. It has not been my experience, but you could. The thing that I am starting to see more and more now that all 4 of my kids are being schooled right now, and your home, it's already an educational environment.
Yes.
If you're deciding to homeschool, you're deciding to do that on purpose. That's what it comes down to. So when we have spent years and we're not done. We're going to keep finding out what curriculums work for us because that's their job. We don't live for the curriculum. It's there for us. So I find, where are my kids' strengths and weaknesses? This one, she's a good writer, so we ought to have more writing. Let's find a way to make her history a huge amount of writing, okay? And the reverse is true. I've got one that her hands shake. Writing is hard, but she can recite things, and she can sing things, and she can read things. And so when we do, when we want to learn our nouns and verbs, we recite it. We put it to a song because we can. Yeah. I think that's... I think there are so many parents today that are seeing the difficulty of remote learning. Like, this is a mess. And maybe school was a mess before, but you never would have had to think about it, right? It was what we did. The fact is, homeschooling is how you educate your kids. So if you are a small business owner, if you're an entrepreneur, maybe your schooling looks different. Maybe it happens in the evening. Maybe it involves having the retired gal down the street come and teach French to your son. Like, there's just, I think that homeschooling, to me, successful homeschooling, whatever that means, it means community. I don't have to be brilliant at algebra. I have to be connected to people that are brilliant at algebra. And I would not have known to go looking for them if I didn't have the need. I think that the biggest myth that I see is, yeah, that works for you. I could never do that. Well, sure. You're not going to do my kind of homeschooling. You're going to do yours. You're going to do, you're going to make sure that your kids can read, that they can, function in the world. You're going to teach them how to think. And that is going to be so refreshing after what we've been doing in public schools for a long time.
Yes.
We don't spend 8 hours a day schooling. We spend about 3.5 to 4.
Yeah. And I like that it's flexible. Yeah. It's flexible. Yeah. It's not this push. It's not this force. It's not this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way we're going to continue. It's adaptable. Yes. Today we got sunshine outside. So they ran around outside before we started school. And that meant that we started a half an hour late. And you know what? They came in with clearer heads than they would otherwise. Yeah. And I like having the freedom to do that, to be able to look and say, what is going to be best for us today? And it turns out that all of my kids are more friendly than I am. So I think that, socially, it's what you decide to do. You want your kids to play sports? Go put them in sports. There's nothing to stop you. You pay taxes, go join your local sports team, back when they do that again, I guess. Yeah. Now, what about, I have some parents, because we're on that teeter of, going homeschooling. Mm-hmm. I have some parents that say to me, I could, you can, because you're, they paint you in the loveliest light, right? We never make mistakes. You're so patient and kind. And I'm like, yeah, you should have saw me an hour ago. It's you're so lovely and patient and creative and kind and wonderful. And they think we just have it right all the time. I could never do that. I don't have the personality. I don't have the patience. I don't have do you think there is truth to that? That if mom or dad just can't deal, should they not even consider homeschooling? Or I would say option C. I think that with a caveat, I think if you are an abusive drunk as a parent, shame on you, go to jail anyway. Okay. Not really what we're talking about. I'm not saying that abusive parents should pin their kids at home. I don't abuse your kids. But if you're just talking that personality wise, you don't feel like you're equipped to be a teacher, then maybe what homeschooling looks like for you is recruiting your community. One of the best homeschooling situations that I know of personally involves a neighborhood. And there's 3 homeschooling families, and the kids will walk from house to house because one of those moms is brilliant at English and the other can teach little kids to read and the other one can do math projects. And so, the thing about homeschooling that is probably a misconception that I would say to those parents that say, yeah, I could never do that. But you can do something. And maybe your skill set isn't being the one sitting and explaining. Maybe your skill set is being the one that finds the people that come and do this and love it and do it well, because we're all gifted at different things. And the fact is we're all gifted at things that are necessary to the world. You have something that the world needs. And that means that you have something that your kid needs educationally. Mm. And quite frankly, if your big problem is patience, then maybe you need to be homeschooling. Because patience isn't something that shows up until you work at it. Yeah. Ain't that the truth? So true. I love that you said homeschooling is about community. I've never heard that before. Oh yeah. And just there are co-ops. There's so many ways that you could do this in a communal way. But even just, I have been so struck with how like you were saying before with your son, start the conversation. You will be amazed at the skills that the people around you have sitting there. Retired physicists that are like, well, sure, I love doing math with little kids.
It happens all the time, but it requires us kind of getting outside of our picture of what is normal and asking the question, like, is there someone here that can do this alongside? Because all of us love to be using our gifts, which means that physicist down the road, he's his best self when he's getting to use that gift too. So it's not a burden that you're taking. You'll have something to offer them. They can have something to offer you. I would say no parent right now, again, barring the ones that belong to jail, don't pass go. But no parent should be writing this off, because you gotta be able to take an honest look right now at schools as they are now and say, are you really telling me that you can't do better than that?
Yeah. I don't buy it. I agree. And, I have some fantastic friends who are fantastic teachers. And I'm like, but you are not the norm. Yeah. You are not the norm. I'm not saying all teachers are bad and all schooling is terrible and the system is broken, but it is. There are things that need to be looked at and upgraded, and until more people homeschool or more people retire and new teachers get in there, whatever it is, like, things aren't going to change. And I think as parents, we forget that we have the choice to homeschool. We have the choice to pull them out of school. We have the choice to be flexible. I think that's a big thing with homeschooling too. People think it's like a solo sport, like all the pressure. I have a friend who's a homeschooling mom, and she said, I love it, like everything you were talking about, flexibility, but she said, I worry that if they don't get it, then the responsibility falls on me. Like I'm a bad teacher, or I didn't do my job. And I think people think they equate homeschooling with like solo, you are responsible. And it's not. Right. Like you said, it's community.
Well, we got to remember that fear is a bad decision maker. So every time that, that we start out, like, because I get that. I remember at some point during the last year thinking, this is finally the year that it all evens out. I'm not going to worry about my kids being behind anymore. Those kids haven't even been in school, right? Like, but that's a real worry. Like, I worry that my kids, that I will have ill-equipped them, right? The further on I get into this, the more I realize you're a mom. You're not God. Okay. Yeah. You can't actually control everything. What you can do is do the work faithfully. So school them in your imperfect way. Remember that this isn't so much about kids being schooled as it is educating them. Yeah. And education might mean that they go with you to your small business. Education might mean that you're going to teach them how to farm alongside you, or how to do sales, or how to write. Educate them. Don't school them. Public schools can school them. This is what it looks like. It looks like teachers sniping at kids who show up a minute late on Zoom. Okay.
Yes.
Go follow Lisa on Facebook.
Right. Right. I remember listening to, have you ever watched Red Table Talk with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith? It's on Facebook as well. It's like a watched show. Okay. And they did like a Father's Day special, and Will Smith was talking about his dad, who actually wasn't, who was like abusive and a drinker and had like all these faults, right? But he was saying the one good thing is that his dad would pull him out of school regularly, because his dad said, you will learn more about the world by being next to me, tinkering with cars and having conversations with a mechanic or doing things with cars. And he said, school is everywhere. Like, education is everywhere. Everything is education. Everything is a teaching opportunity. Everything is a learning opportunity. School is everywhere. Yeah. And I was like, that was my biggest takeaway. I was like, that's so true. Yes, our son is learning when he's actually in school, but he's learning so much more about the world we take him everywhere when we go on mastermind. Well, we haven't been anywhere lately, but when we normally go on mastermind trips, and, he's in airports and he's seeing mom speaking on stage, and they're so receptive. Like, he's just seeing the way we do business and how we live, and all of it. And I think that takes the pressure off when you realize that they learn so much more outside of just the structure of school.
Yeah.
That's so key. That's so key. I think it makes me think of like back in the day, like I think of my mother-in-law, how she was saying like when she had, my husband and like her kids, like it's like, 2 doors down, Jane gave her the crib, and 3 doors down, someone gave her the high chair, and this one babysat on this day. And like your community became your support system.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me think of that when you said homeschooling is like community.
Oh yeah. You'll be amazed if you start putting out feelers. I mean, shoot, put a post up on Facebook. You will be astounded at the homeschooling families that are ready to share this experience with you. Like nobody that I know is doing it solo. This is, for me, I have my mom. My mom is my best idea person. And I look back at the major educational successes that we've had, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was her idea too. You don't have to go far to find someone that is smarter than you. For me, I don't have to go far. But homeschooling is not solo. And I think that is, this is all on me. All of my decisions are the end of the world for a long time with raising special needs kids. Those years that we were in the hospital all the time, that pressure, I just about snapped. It's very fun to me to finally get to a spot where I can see like, nope, we have support. There's another way to do this. If what we're doing isn't working, change it. I mean, you're an entrepreneur. This is like breathing to you, right? Like something isn't working, you do something else. And it's true with education too, I think.
I love that. Barb, I'm just like in awe of you. Like, I love your book. I love what you're about. I love your life. I know it sounds weird to say that, but I love like just the way you live, if that makes sense. I love the way you live.
Thanks. I do too. Thank you.
Like it's, there are people that are surviving. It's almost like we talked about that. Your life doesn't have to be normal to be good. There's people that are surviving and there's people that are living. Yeah. And I love the way you and your family are living together.
I'm very thankful. I think my least favorite word in the world is overwhelmed. That is the thing I don't ever want to be.
Yeah. You don't have to be.
You don't have to be. This is what we've got. And it could be great. I could look at it and say, this is great. We're stretched thin and we aren't living like other people. But I don't want to get to the end of my life and look back and feel like I spent so much time being stressed over it that I missed it. Yeah. I don't want to miss this. There's too much. You know what I mean? There's too much that I just think, please don't let me forget this. Let me stay present for what's happening now. Will it last? I don't know. Will my kids stay stable? I don't know. But I really like getting to be here now. I like getting to see now.
I love that. I love that. So where can they get the book? Where can they get in touch with you? Everybody, please read this book. It's so good. I will tell you, even I binged it in like 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours. I'm not sure how long it took me, but I couldn't put it down. There were so many good moments in this book, even about the part where they got their legs moving and they kicked over the Christmas tree. I don't want to give away too many details of the book.
That was a true story though. Yeah, that actually happened. Fishing line is how we got the tree fixed. So yes, go get that book. I'm so tickled that you read it. That just makes me happy. Yes, you can find me on my website. If you can spell my name, then you're ahead of most of the population, but it's barbarabraendlein.com. You can get the book on Amazon. You can get it from Atmosphere Press. It's my publisher. But just go to the website and you'll find all the things. You can hear me on the Deciding Factor podcast. And drop me a line. Tell me what you think.
I love that. So I will make sure, don't worry, listeners, if you are like driving or cooking or doing whatever you're doing, I will make sure that Barb's website, the Deciding Factor podcast, all that good stuff, how to get her book, all of those links are in the show notes so that you have it. Please go pick up the book. It's so stinking good. Barb, I know that our work together is not finished. You'll be hearing from Barb again because I just love you. And Fun Quest.
And Fun Quest.
I mean, okay, you have to throw in like a 30-second little, you go on this show, you don't know what, it's a podcast, you don't know what questions you're going to get asked. You got like a minute to be funny and fun and creative and like wow people. And it's just wild. And you win like the title. There's no like money. There wasn't crazy that you win. But me and Barb were like fierce competitors on this thing.
Totally fixated on winning. Yeah.
Yes. So like I'm gonna put the FunQuest stuff in there too. Go vote for Barb when you see her on the show. Because every vote counts on that darn thing, right? So
and like for real, like we actually count your votes. It will do something.
They do. So your vote matters, right?
Yes.
Your vote matters. Oh my goodness, Barb, thank you for being here with me. Listeners, thank you for being here with me. And we'll catch you next time on the Lisa Pezik Show.